Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Decorex International Fair and to the Talks programme. Thank you so much for coming. Today's talk is going to be entitled House, Home, Live, Work, in which our panel of experts will be discussing key property and interiors trends that we are being seen now and looking into the future as well. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce our panel to you. We have Richard Parr from
Morning.
Richard Parr Architects. We have Lindsay Cuthill,
Hello.
Head of Country Houses at Savills. His first time at Decorex, I believe, Lindsay.
It is.
That's wonderful. Alex Jukovic from Helen Green Design, part of the Alect Group. Alec Group looks after properties in London, the countryside, and overseas. And then finally we have Louise Wicksteed from Sims Hilditch, and they're responsible for some beautiful, elegant houses in both country and town. So thank you for our panel today. I'm going to sit down for the next bit. The discussion is really, we've been through the pandemic, and there's nothing like a pandemic to focus the mind on what's been most important, which has been the home. We've seen some extraordinary changes in the last 18 months, and I think, Richard, you were going to start me off by saying, people are investing in properties in a way that we've never seen before.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. And I think there is a shortage, and it's very difficult to buy property at the moment. And it really is a feeding frenzy. But I think not just on a financial level of investment, I think it's also an emotional level. And I think we've gone through a period of very sort of introspective living. And I think everybody's had that time to analyse how they live, where they live, even as much as people haven't travelled. So even sort of holidays and staycations and the impact of the hotels opening up. We've been working on the Newt for several years, which we've just done the latest phase. And I think that people staying in those places then causes them to question how they live. And I have this saying that a house is a hotel for life when we do them. And I think that, I think that investment emotionally is going back into people's houses, and I think there's a real consideration now as to a different way of living, and that has many facets in itself.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. And actually, Louise, you were saying that, the same, this investment in property. What have you found at Sims Hilditch as regards clients? What are they wanting?
Yeah, I think the hotel thing is really interesting. So I think now there's all these amazing kind of country house hotels, and that's kind of influencing the landscape. So I think people are being even more creative, and actually I think the design trends whereby you used to have your sort of city look and then maybe the country look, and now it's much more kind of interchangeable. And I think all the detail, the attention to detail we put into the city properties is coming out to the countryside, but equally that kind of classicism and that beautiful kind of British English aesthetic is coming back into the city in some ways too. So it's kind of an exciting, diverse time for design, and there's no kind of rules. I think every house is different, every client is different, and I think that's what's really exciting, is we're getting to interpret, the English landscape and the British culture in lots of different ways within the properties. Obviously, the kind of connection to the landscape is just so important for our clients out in the countryside, and how you can create that kind of seamless flow from inside to outside, and how you bring the country, the garden in, and obviously working with amazing architects and landscape designers, and it's the whole package, all of those things working together, which, makes really, really exciting properties at the moment.
Exactly. And Alex, in city properties, have you found as well that this idea of bringing nature into the home again is
yes, absolutely.
quite
I think
a trend?
The trend is to bring the different parts of life into your home. So obviously people got much closer with nature in the last year, and then the connection of nature and appreciation of nature. So whether it shows through decorative patterns or influences of colours as well. I think I think it was Financial Times over the weekend, I read the classic grey palette is getting very outdated finally.
Yes, yes.
And we know, so we're always trying to push our clients to test their boundaries a little bit, bring more colour and bring more natural tones in, but the safe greys were always the go-to. And now it's all seemed to be disappearing. So I think that we got out of our homes, even though we were locked in, but we were closer with nature, and now we're trying to bring that nature into our homes,
Exactly.
even in the city. It's
Exactly.
very, very exciting from the design point of view.
Yes. As regards investing in property as well, Alex, you probably have seen that people are coming up with more of their own ideas of what they want to do in the home. And what have you noticed? Any particular interesting changes?
Yes, I mean, I think people had much more time to give thought of what they want. They realised they can't do it themselves. There was a lot of DIY. We all probably did a little bit in lockdown. And a lot of people thought they have time and they can look after their homes and their properties. And there is so much information out there, which helps our communication with the clients for sure. They know what they want. They are able to express it and verbalize it through the pictures and communicate to us. But we definitely they need our help still. So there is no set trends. I think it depends on the studio as well and the clientele. Our studio, we pride ourselves to be tailored to our clients. So they all come with their own individual taste and personality, which we're trying then to guide to give them a family home, because that's what we do. We create family homes. There is no signature look. There is just guidance, and we're trying to bring out as much of our client's personality as possible. So there is no one set trend in terms of the look, but people are very opinionated. They know more what they want to know, actually, I think. Absolutely. They had time to reflect.
Yes. Now, Lindsay, obviously what we have all noticed in lockdown is people want more space, don't they? Now, what have you noticed as a Savills agent who deal with country houses? What have you noticed? Have you had an influx of Londoners going out? And actually, have you had a few that may have decided to be coming back now?
Yeah, look, I mean, there was this sort of paradigm shift, really, in how people looked at their lives. And initially there was that sort of rush out, and a lot of people wanted to just go and rent something that wasn't in a city, because I think that there was this fear about what cities might be like in a pandemic. And then as that story developed, what developed is that people enjoyed themselves in that short stay, and then the rush really started. So you talked about a frenzy, a sort of feeding frenzy. Yeah. I mean, it did get pretty frenzied out there, and people did want to, well, of course, what people were able to do was learn that you can work from home pretty effectively.
Yes.
And whilst there's now a bit of a drive back into offices and back into London, people have learned that they are going to work differently for the future. And so the idea that you don't have to get on a train 5 days a week or drive or slog through traffic jams has allowed people to think very differently about their space. So extra space, the sort of things that matter to people now. Richard, I know in a previous conversation we had, you talked about the sort of revolution of the railways 150 years ago. The revolution of superfast broadband in the country, I think, is life-changing and will absolutely redefine how people can live in the country rather than only that connectivity in a city.
Exactly. Richard, you are very involved with the modern country house, aren't you, with your practice? So super fast broadband
well,
being
our
one
practice
of the key
has,
elements.
Yeah, our practice has a studio in London and in the Cotswolds.
Yes.
So we see both sides. So and I've, as I was discussing with Lindsay before, I think the fast broadband is the biggest revolution since trains took people out of the cities. And that allows people, before the trains allowed people to go and come back. Well, now actually the broadband allows people to go and they don't need to come back as much. So I think that stigma of working from home or not being in an office in whatever city of the country it is, it's not just London, I think that's a really positive change. And I think that then leads on to how people live. And traditionally people went to the country to shoot and ride, or shoot or hunt or fish. Well, actually now it's cycling, all sorts of other sports are sort of attracting people out of cities into space. And I think what we're seeing is a different set of toys that people like in houses. So natural swimming ponds, space, sort of gardens to do yoga in, places to walk, places to do all sorts of other things. It is a change in the way that people are sort of using their leisure time. Because they're not wasting time travelling as much.
Exactly. And didn't you say that people were wanting to have dining areas inside their greenhouses? Or
yeah, I mean, it's actually that. I think Alex was talking about the reconnection with nature.
Yes.
And there is a reconnection with nature, and we've got lots of clients who are buying land to rewild it. And there's a social conscience as well that's creeping in, and a real interest in nature. So yes, sort of not just a greenhouse for putting a few tomatoes in, it's actually for entertaining. So people are using bits of their, and it doesn't really matter whether it's a cottage or a country estate. It's still the same concept.
I'm imagining a slightly large greenhouse here rather than one of the standard size ones.
It's not an 8x6. No.
Right.
Funnily enough,
Grow bags.
I was just going to say, funnily enough, we're actually working on a property at the moment, and they've got kind of an extension, kind of orangery, but the orangery actually overlooks their vegetable gardens. They've got like tiered kind of vegetable patches, kind of, but big ones, like the kind of thing you get at the pig, where it's, a huge kind of grey area, and actually they're then bringing the produce in to then, cook, and then, so they're kind of experiencing it through the interior. They're kind of experiencing being in the garden and that kind of whole sort of well-being journey, which is an amazing thing, obviously, if you can have that in your property.
Well, it's very therapeutic, growing things and actually eating things
it's rewarding.
that you then... And I think that is about enriching the way people live. It's another quality that you can get. And that's not just for country properties. You can get that in the city as well.
Yeah.
Exactly, a nice balcony garden, that kind of thing.
Well, at Chelsea this year, they had a whole row of, one of their
Wonderful
themes
balconies,
was
weren't they?
balcony
Balcony
gardens.
Smaller than this platform.
Yes,
Yeah.
for your tomatoes.
I think people started growing, even if it's just a window box, and then we take pride of what we produce. And the same, the kitchen spaces. So in London, you would think, with all the restaurants or our doorsteps, the kitchen was never a priority, or very rarely. And now everyone is back in the kitchen and enjoying this time off, because we all had the forced time off, and now we're trying to find ways of introducing it permanently into our life, whether it's through cooking or whatever hobbies, or a little garden, or escaping to the country, even permanently or for a period of time in a year. So it's definitely something new.
Exactly. And Lindsay, so in terms of selling points, your business is to help buyers and sellers. Is the garden a selling point? What are the things that people are looking for now? What seals the deal now?
Look, outside space certainly matters, and in the country, arguably it's a given. In London, that does perhaps create some properties that are going to be more popular than others, more sought after. So things without a balcony or any sort of outside space probably are a bit more of a challenge in the market right now. But actually, London, I think it's worth saying that the London market is having a bit of more of a robust time again. We are beginning to see demand returning to London. So actually, I didn't answer your question about people bouncing back into London, maybe having come to the country, thought how marvellous it is, but then actually went through a lockdown in winter in the country, which is sort of slightly less fun.
Slightly muddier.
Slightly muddier, slightly wetter. And so some people may well be thinking about returning. And the good news is that property prices in the country rose so much in that period that actually they probably can get out and actually possibly make a profit, or at least get out at cost.
Well, that's an interesting point, because also if your property in the country has increased in value or is increasing in value, you're more likely to want to invest in it, aren't you? You're going to see a return on your investment if you're going to redo it, remodel it, that kind of thing.
Yeah, we're really finding that, because traditionally the further you go into sort of deepest sort of shires, the less valuable property is, the less actually you're prepared to spend on it. So your spend per square metre, that question, will I get my money back? Well, you probably wouldn't have done at one point. Whereas now, actually, what we're seeing is that expectation that of the same quality that you would invest into a central London property, you can now afford it sort of quota-wise to invest into a country property, which is really good from the design world point of view, because it gives us that freedom to put in all the sort of infrastructure, quality of finishes that perhaps historically 20, 30 years ago people wouldn't necessarily, they'd have put up with some drafts and inconveniences and creaks, whereas now that's not the case.
No bad plumbing now in the countryside, is there?
Yeah, and actually properties that have been done properly sell at an absolute premium, don't they, Lindsay?
Look, I've changed my line, before the pandemic, when people said, oh, this house, it needs everything doing to it, and I'm never going to get the money back. I would say, well, you're not investing. This is not a property investment. This is a home for life, and therefore, the sort of returns are irrelevant, because that was the only line I could give them, because they were absolutely not going to make their money back. But actually now, with property prices forecast to rise sort of 25% over the next 5 years, actually they probably will get their money back. So I can change my line.
Exactly. Exactly. People have been talking about levelling up, haven't they, for quite a while, and that's genuinely what we're seeing. And I think you said that actually country villages, you're going to start seeing better shops, better services, because you're going to be servicing a
Yeah,
wealthier
I mean, if there is,
community.
we talk about this investment, and if you have a well-off group of people investing in their properties locally, they'll be investing in the village and the shops, and the demand in those shops
It trickles down,
changes.
doesn't it?
It does, yeah.
They spend time there now. It's
The
not
local
just a
economy.
commuting. Yeah, exactly.
I
Well,
mean-
we've noticed a massive influx of inquiries for small apartments, and this is the trend of pied-à-terres returning to London. First, I was a little bit worried because all the inquiries for one-bedroom apartments, and I was just a little bit like, what's happening? But then we just realised it's people who actually have their permanent homes in the countryside, but they need something smaller in the city and get the best of both worlds. So that's complete comeback, and that's quite exciting, actually.
It is exciting. And Louise, you were talking about urban levels of sophistication increasingly going into country interiors.
So I think, places like the Newt and the kind of Heckville Place, all these kind of destination places now being in the countryside, have opened people's eyes to the fact there is life outside of London. There are beautiful places to go and spend time, and actually, like you said, you can have the best of both worlds. If you can create a space where you can work from home, and you've got the broadband and it's set up, you don't have to be constantly coming into the city. And I think, we've noticed that attention to detail, and I think it's not just the beautiful front of house rooms, like the reception rooms and the, beautiful drawing rooms and master bedrooms, but it's all the sort of more practical spaces that we're getting really exciting about designing. So the boot room, for example, it's one of our most popular spaces that we design with the clients, and they get really excited about it because it's the sort of practicality and the attention to detail. And we were chatting earlier, but actually, having somewhere to bring the dog in and wash them in a beautiful
Wash the dog off.
space,
Yeah,
and
can't put a value on
the
that.
the
quite
dog
frankly.
is, literally got the top. Sort of in the hierarchy of the family, we're seeing
Well, it
so
is in
much.
our family, to be fair.
Some of our clients say they will drop children there as well with the muddy wellies and wash them with
And
the
that,
dog.
of course, is a luxury you absolutely cannot have in a
No,
London property,
absolutely.
because it needs to be someone's bedroom or someone's kitchen.
Yes.
What's also interesting is the attraction to the countryside by the younger demographic, because our clients, they usually between 35 to 45 years old, and so the young families, and it used to be Chelsea, the city, completely London, the first family, and then later moving on, and all the older clients were having their second, third homes in the country. And now we have multiple projects and young families deciding to move to the country to start the family.
They've leapfrogged that
Yes.
level, isn't
So
it?
it's quite interesting, and I think it is the attraction of those very popular hotels, resorts that actually open the eyes of younger demographic to the countryside. Even the popularity of Soho Farmhouse, for example, it's young creatives, and you would never think that this will be attractive to these kind of people, but it is now, and we're very excited because it's
It is
opened
key.
our world, and
I think the
for us
country's
in terms
less of a
design.
graveyard now. It's less
Yeah.
of a sort of it's less
Absolutely.
for retiring, more about action and taking all the things of any sort of life, city life, or wherever,
Yeah.
and just doing it in space.
Exactly, a younger
Um,
demographic, and as we were saying, these country hotels have really upped the ante now, haven't they? They are places of inspiration for interiors. Perhaps in the last 18 months we haven't been going overseas. We've slightly fallen back in love with our own countryside, haven't
We
we?
have.
I think we've rediscovered it, and that then trickles down to all the things we put into those. Certainly what we've found at the Newt is that we've tried to use local craftsmen, most of the stone we use comes from a few miles away. We're less sort of looking to the sort of far corners of the world to sort of fill in with exotic things. It's actually and that comes in with the responsibility as well, but also the supply chains
Yeah.
are so affected by what's
Yes.
happened.
I was
That
just
it's
gonna
actually a lot
say.
easier to buy a piece of limestone from Somerset than
Yeah.
it is to import it from South America.
Totally. We've all had to be a lot more kind of conscious, like you
Which
said.
is a positive thing.
Yeah, of the supply chain and being able to fulfill deadlines and work with clients, because obviously the pandemic has put so much pressure on the supply chain. So it's forcing us to think more creatively and actually source more from the UK. And if we've got all these amazing kind of industries and crafts people here, then it's really nice to be able to support them. We're working with George Smith at the moment, who have an amazing kind of workshop up in Newcastle, and everything's handmade in the UK, and we're doing a little furniture collection with them. But it was so nice to be able to go and travel and see the pieces being made here and kind of like support that industry. So yeah, I think it's great that we can, buy British, and also it gives more resonance, doesn't it, to the project. If you've sourced the stone from the UK and there's more kind of emphasis on local and materials, and it
But
gives...
maybe not just local to the project
Yeah.
as well, because actually I think this country is almost unique in the fact that you go a few miles, and the materials are different. So you even take the Cotswolds that we know very well. Every 5 miles there's a different stone. And so being able to use that, I think people are looking for individuality,
Yes.
and rather than just everything looking, and I think Alex mentioned about this sort of grey palette, which is a very international palette. Actually, we're finding much more quirkiness, and you get that out of not looking too far away.
Absolutely. And Alex, your company is quite interested in sustainability.
Yes, it is, and it's always been one of our main points, obviously sourcing British and having British suppliers, which sometimes was a little bit problematic because clients would ask, like, oh, I know you can get furniture made in Portugal, Italy, it's cheaper. And we always try to push for British makers. Obviously, the quality is different, the control, and in general, our identity is British interiors. And now, finally, we have clients coming to us and trying to make sure everything is British. So there is a lot of it, obviously, at the back of Brexit and the supply chains issues, but the very, very big awareness of sustainability as well. And then a few months ago, we've launched this big pledge of trying to be sustainable luxury brand. We've noticed this wasn't really happening in the luxury interiors industry. We source from all around the world, and we thought, oh, okay, we can't really do this. It's not for us. We need to make sure the luxurious products and designs we offer is up to scratch. And then we thought, hang on a minute, surely we can do something about it. And we started looking internally what we can do, from very small differences and changes in sourcing to actually some big decisions, and then cutting some suppliers off and just actually looking locally.
It's very important to ask questions.
Yes,
I think as designers, particularly with architecture, we ask questions. Okay, so that brick, where does the clay come from for that brick, or where's that piece of glass made? And I've certainly gone onto building sites and really bored into why where things are being bought from by a contractor, because actually as designers we never really have that much control. You specify something, and a contractor will try and find the cheapest way of procuring it. Whereas actually now it's up to us to really demand that there is this sort of ethical response all the way through the supply chain.
It's great to see the industry doing that. It's also great to see the clients demanding it
Yeah,
as
and
well.
also in our private lives as well. I'm sure we're all taking a little bit more time to think, what am I buying, where is it coming from, whether it's fruit and veg we buy for dinner to big decisions. But as designers, it is our responsibility to do, and we just have to. And, again, sometimes it's very difficult. There aren't that many sustainable products that meet that luxury level, we're looking for. But sometimes they're just looking at 2 samples of fabric and deciding which one is more natural content or where it's traveling
Alex,
from.
do you not think that the question is, what is luxury?
Yeah.
So just because something comes from somewhere else or far away, that doesn't make it more luxurious.
Exactly.
I mean, there is and I think we've found this over this perhaps more introspective period, that there is luxury under our noses.
Yes.
And historically everybody's been trying to find something different that people haven't seen before, and you have to look further and further, which becomes less and less ethical. And now we've found that actually there is this luxury, be it sort of an amazing holiday in England in a destination hotel.
And the association of Britishness actually as well, because I'm not originally British, and it's a massive legacy all over the world. You say something's British, it's from England, and everyone associates it with luxury. We probably don't have it here because we're looking elsewhere, as you said, and actually we need to realize that brand, it's still incredibly valid all over the world.
We see that, of course, from despite the fact that travel over the last 18 months has been incredibly difficult. I was amazed how many overseas buyers were keen to try and find a way of buying a bit of England.
That is interesting.
So the idea of a virtual sale, actually we absolutely carried out virtual sales.
You've had people buy without actually
people
seeing
buying
the
properties.
going
Okay, they got
inside the
proxy
property.
people to look at them, but I've got 2 sales that completed now more than 6 months ago, and I know for a fact that neither of the new owners have yet to come here.
Well, I've talked to potential clients who I've seen the house before they have.
I guess that's like London rental market. They go without everyone even
Well,
viewing them now.
You kind of get it when it's a square box and it's sort of just like another square box.
Yeah.
But, as we discussed earlier, the sort of uniqueness of every single house is so different. So for someone to take that leap of faith,
at this level as well, financially,
and
it's
at
such
those
a
large
huge financial
sums.
commitment.
But actually, it does just tell you that actually when travel is relaxed properly again, we have got a wall of buyers, particularly North American buyers. Those are clearly a group of people that are very keen to be back. We've done some of the
So
best
what's the
sales.
message, Lindsay? Buy now before the
Well,
lunch happens.
the Yanks are coming, and when they come, they probably appreciate our heritage buildings,
Britishness,
perhaps
they love,
Yeah.
more
yes.
than any other nationality.
Yeah,
I
they
mean,
love
remote
St.
design
James.
is just completely, it's
Yeah.
now exploded. Like we're just completing a job that started in January in Vienna and traveled once there in January, then we worked for several months on it, and now we're returning to site and installing in a couple of weeks. So 2 years ago, I would say no, it's impossible, and now we managed. So I think that opens so many other opportunities actually to working internationally as well and remotely, and
But
clients actually
Lindsay, you were
used to
talking
it.
about that sort of piece of Britishness. But I think what we're finding is there's an investment into the future of Britishness as well. So in country houses, I would say more than half of what we design, we do a lot of refurbishment and complete remodeling, but we do a lot of completely start from scratch. And that is creating this sort of new style of country house where people do want the sort of the flow of life to carry on without the compartmentalization. And I think there are two sides to this. People buy historic houses because they like buying a piece of history. Or then there's now the sort of, especially with the value of country houses, it's actually worth building something and getting exactly what you want and knowing that it's worth something.
Look, there's a large body of people who have the passion and the drive and are working with the right people to say, this is what we want to create our own building, our own legacy, rather than inherit, as it were, somebody else.
Yeah. And we have this phrase, we create legacy architecture for a lot of our clients. And I think I've got a lot of projects at the moment where we're just given greenfield sites or just beautiful little bits of England and say, could you build something here? And there is legislation to do that. And we've gained quite a reputation for producing these really interesting houses, and we're contemporizing traditional materials. So we're using traditional crafts in a contemporary way. So these houses have a validity, they have a texture, they have integrity, and they're not just pastiches. I mean, they're sort of investing into the future.
Yes. And I think that the idea of the return of craftsmanship, bespoke. Louise, you were talking about traditional interiors as having a revival as well. There's classicism is having a revival as well.
Yeah, I think
so.
there's
We're seeing
beautiful-
Britishness in interiors as
Yeah,
well.
this beautiful kind of classic look that we're known for here in the UK. In fact, funny enough, we have some American clients who bought a lovely property in the Cotswolds completely without having seen it, because they bought into the beautiful English countryside and the heritage and the history, that we're lucky enough to have in this country. And I think where our studio is based, we're also in the Cotswolds, just outside Bath, but we're lucky to have an amazing array of places like Tetbury with beautiful, antiques shops and places where we can go, and that from a sustainability perspective is also really, really good. So we're trying to use a lot more sourced
You're
antiques.
looking at low miles,
Yes,
that things
and also,
aren't transported as far.
Yeah, I love antiques because they've got the time, the beautiful timelessness, and they're going to hold their value because they've already got an inherent value within
That's
them.
luxury
and
upcycling, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. But also we're spending a lot more time with our clients working through what they already have, So whereas I think 5 years ago we might have just cleared the decks and started from fresh, there's a lot more kind of emphasis on working with things that people have, whether that's beautiful artwork or, a couple of pieces that they've kind of got an emotional attachment to, and it's like, how can we work these into the interior? Because they've got that sense of history and, a feeling, like they're part of the family's kind of heritage as well. So I think that's quite an exciting, thing to sort of work into the interior. And then I think, there's so many amazing kind of prints and collections and wallpapers that are coming out at the moment with the beautiful references to the kind of English botanicals, and, you've got all the big kind of fabric houses that are bringing back maybe more sort of older collections. So they're sort of reviving them, and then we're using them in different ways. So I think that's really exciting.
Is that drawn from British history? Or
I think
historical references?
Yeah, definitely. So they're going through their archives and bringing back kind of older fabrics and older prints, which we may have considered to be old-fashioned at one point, but now you're kind of using them in different ways. And I think, contrasting colours and being a bit more playful with the palette. So, whether that's painting the skirtings in a contrasting colour, to the wallpapers, or, bringing the wallpaper across the ceiling and being a bit more fun with it. And that's what we're seeing. Our clients are wanting to push in different directions. So some are wanting to be more bold with colour, I mean, we also have some young clients as well, which was really interesting, who bought a beautiful property in Jersey, and they wanted to go very pared back and more contemporary, and it was more about using a more controlled palette of materials, but beautiful limestones and timber floors, but actually it was all quite calm. And so, yeah, so I think that's why, you know, it's such a great place to be in at the moment with the interiors and architectural world, because there are no kind of rules and there are no set looks. It's, you know, every client is an opportunity to create something special.
So generally, people are getting a lot more adventurous, aren't they?
Yes.
Is that what you're finding?
They're better informed, aren't they? I
Yeah,
suppose.
I think so.
Through social media in particular, I suppose.
Well, think of your
That's
social
true.
media.
I think what's also interesting, obviously, we've all noticed an incredible increase of prices, whether in properties or actual furniture. It was slightly worrying, but I think actually it's heading the right direction, also from the sustainability point of view, because I think we had a few years when interior designs, it was very temporary, especially for people with very high wealth. You know, they wanted to do something and it was temporary. They can change it in a few years. They didn't really care. And it is a little heartbreaking because we spent so much time putting these things together as well, and knowing that it's going to be changed with the next owner of the property, it wasn't the best feeling. And now, you know, people are really committed to investment, and if they have to spend a significant amount of money on a piece of furniture, they want to know it's going to stay with the family for generations, and that's the further incentive to make something special, make something local, or maybe the piece gets sold with the house and always stays there because it's been made custom for this particular space. It's music to our ears because we always connect with the actual house, with the family, and want to create something special for generations rather than something mass-produced somewhere far away and then disposed. So.
Yes, and I also think that the pandemic, this is all part of the pandemic, making us think a little bit more about our buying decisions, our interiors decisions, having a bit more care about you know, heritage or as you said, heirlooms or antiques. It's much more important. Well, we've got a little bit more time, and then we're going to ask questions. So start thinking about your questions in the audience, because I'd love you to ask the panel. But anything else, Richard, you'd like to add in terms of what you've been working on recently and what clients perhaps have been asking for?
Yeah, I mean, I think as a practice, we've very much developed sort of architecture in landscape, and it doesn't have to be a big landscape. It could be a suburban landscape or but actually that sort of buildings in landscape has become a big theme. That was really happening pre-pandemic, but it's really sort of roller coaster. We were doing a lot of that probably 5 years ago, and delivering new country houses, but the garden became just as big a commission as the house. So we found ourselves probably working, the spend on the garden, actually probably irritatingly, it's probably been higher sometimes than the spend on the decoration, because actually people have really been looking outwards. And that's been a big drive for us, actually looking from the building, looking outwards has been perhaps one of the biggest changes that we've experienced, which is really exciting. And that may be, as I said before, maybe natural swimming ponds, it may be, you know, sort of areas which you retreat to. It's you know, we put fire pits in the middle of lakes. We've had sort of you know, wild areas, and people are really interested in what goes on outside their windows. So I think
home offices in the garden as well.
Yeah,
have been hugely popular.
completely. Yeah.
In outbuildings, you know, that kind of thing. What have you found,
Well, look,
Lindsay?
I'd pick up on that landscaping piece, really. I mean, I think that before it was possibly a secondary consideration to the interiors, because people are looking outside more, they are beginning to properly appreciate and understanding that actually if you want to create this mature landscape, that requires a big investment, but it's one that will pay back well. I think particularly where you are looking at new build, you know, to sort of unfairly plonk a new house in a...
Which we don't, actually.
Well, of course you don't. I know you don't.
Absolutely
But
not.
you know, to have a brand new house in a flat, unadventurous, uninteresting landscape, frankly, that is a waste of good money.
Well, there is that term, landscape architecture.
Yeah.
And that is
It's
what
absolutely
happens.
critical.
Yeah.
So that would be absolutely my sort of sense of how people are looking at their spaces.
Yes. And Alex, how have you found people are responding to the need for more space then within their properties?
They do. Well, we have a little bit different probably demographic clientele. It is mainly push for the sustainability and legacy. Large-scale projects, smaller, because we have a mix of countryside and city projects, but I think it's this consideration to what am I leaving for the future generation, for the new family to be, and this really big push on sustainability, which has been amazing response to what we've been trying to launch internally anyway. But yeah, this thought of like, what are we doing, how long it's going to last, and
But Helen
where
Green,
we
you
live.
do a full design service, don't you? There?
Yes,
So
correct.
you can both do interiors, but you can also do internal remodeling, can't you?
Yes, absolutely. So it is a turnkey. So it's very interesting from that point of view as well. We work with our sister companies, with a construction company as well. And again, for some reason, the clients who are attracted to this kind of service are looking for these features. So it needs to be forever, forever homes, in terms of obviously emotional attachment, but as well as sustainability and the quality as well. So no longer, oh, we can refurbish in 5 years when we change our minds. It's definitely
That
forever.
is interesting. So they're not ripping out and starting again for the sake
Yeah.
of it. There's a lot more investment
Yeah.
in quality that lasts.
Yeah, and even for what's inherited from previous owners as well, even though there is definitely funds to, customize it, but just a little bit more thought and consideration, which sometimes are challenging. We not always love the finishes that are there, or again, some of the clients' existing furniture, but it's a challenge, and obviously on the more moral levels, it's just wonderful that we see this kind of change with
Yeah.
the world when, money is no problem and you can change and have everything. This is actually really reassuring that
They're
we're heading the
thinking
right
about it.
direction. Yeah.
And Louise, have you found that people want turnkey properties now, or is that a key demand for your clients?
Yeah, I think it's just, that thoughtful design is thinking about every detail, isn't it? And really considering how our clients live so that we can create a design that's going to stand the test of time and they're still going to love it in 15, 20 years. And, using materials that wear really well. So actually the house gets better as it gets older. I think if you can design something like that, then you've really, you've fulfilled the brief and you've created something beautiful that has got a legacy. And I think, as designers, and that's what we're interested in. We're interested in creating things which are going to be here, that people are going to use and enjoy being, in that space, and it's going to enhance their lives, with their family. So that's what we're trying to do. And we're obviously really lucky. We're very lucky that we have amazing clients that we get to work on these really exciting creative projects, whether it's a very old property that's got a sort of history that we're having to learn about the history of that house to then bring that into the interior, or if it's something new and contemporary, it's also really exciting. We've got a client who's designing a sort of pavilion in a wild meadow, and their house is actually quite traditional. So they're actually doing something completely the opposite of that, where they can go and sort of entertain or work from that space, and it's almost the complete opposite to the main house, and it's something architecturally very interesting as well. So, I think it's just a very interesting time on the sort of design world because of that kind of dichotomy and being able to go to the extremes of the traditional and the heritage and then the super contemporary as well. So
I think it's also our responsibility now as designers to actually make the clients aware and convince them that this is important to stick true to and again have the legacy to the projects and what we do, and sometimes it's difficult to say no, but I think we can always say no to things we're not comfortable with, and it's an amazing position to be, of course, and not everyone can afford that, but I think we should make sure we push our agenda and actually
It's an exciting
preserve
time.
what are the values that we all believe in. Doesn't matter if it's the architecture or interiors, and we all have different clients, but I think we all agree at this.
Well, you can reassure them that despite the fact that there are people now up for a project, most buyers would rather turn up and turn the key.
Yeah.
So if your fantastic work is brought into question as to the validity of the costs, etc., you can absolutely reassure them that the premium that people will pay to turn that key and buy your many years of experience. How long did somebody said to me? I asked the question of a client once who was in your industry. I said, well, how long did it take you to do this house up? Thinking she'd say 18 months. She said 30 years.
Yeah.
It was that 30 years of experience that your
Which is why it's really
business
important it's not ripped out again as soon as they sell it.
Yeah.
Well, hopefully not. Well, we actually, one of our older projects from 5 years ago in Melbourne just sold, and we had the person who purchased the house approach us. They wanted to actually for us to design their house there, And they decided to buy it. They bought it with all the furniture that we designed 5 years ago. And again, for the resale perspective, you know, when you design for the actual house and all the furniture stays there, the quality was excellent. So
we
5
do quite
years
a lot
later,
quite a
it's
lot of
sold.
those houses that I'm selling will come with sort of, you know, the question will be asked because they love the whole lifestyle. And you know, aside from some very personal things, it's possible that people will consider doing that, particularly the downsized.
And only the good quality items can sustain this long and actually, you know, be an investment
I think
in the
that's
whole
quite an
property.
interesting point because actually, I mean, although I've been around for quite a long time, not many of our houses that we do resell because people keep them for such a long time. And one recently has. And actually, I've been pointing out to people the cost of doing a house. And particularly I think this is the other thing one thing we haven't mentioned is the supply chain shortages and inflation are really going to hit the design world and the ability to do these projects. So actually buying a project that somebody has done really well and you might just have to tinker with a little bit on personal taste it's a premium product now.
Yes, exactly.
To know that you haven't got to take the place apart is...
So buy a finished product.
Or even try getting a builder now.
But those supply issues, that's a temporary issue, surely, isn't it?
I think the inflation issue is the temporary issue. Well, it may be temporary, but it may be temporary for a couple of years.
Yeah.
And if you're buying somewhere and you want to live in it, that's not
But even for
temporary.
luxury rentals as well, because, you know, again, with people struggling to afford, are we getting...
I've been given the 5-minute warning a while ago, but I'm just going to quickly, before we finish, ask if there are any questions from the audience. Yes, over there.
Thank you. I run a business that designs home gyms, and during the pandemic, we've been extremely busy. And I wanted to ask the designers particularly what their experience had been with their clients moving out of London and creating fitness and well-being spaces and integrating wellness design into the whole property.
Thank you very much. Who would like to take that question? Yes, Richard.
I think it's absolutely fundamental. We should be talking. It's absolutely fundamental because it's not just gyms. It's all types of exercise. I think cycling is a big one. Any sort of outdoor exercise. So I mean, I don't think there's a single project where we're not looking at well-being or health or fitness. I mean, we're designing a house on a lake at the moment. You know, so you want to swim in it. So we're doing natural swimming ponds. We're doing. I mean, it's exercise. I would say is absolutely right up there at the top.
It's crucial.
Well, we also have meditation rooms in London now as well. Everyone, even when a very small house or apartment, the need of space, the small quiet space to just relax and
yoga studios,
and just
we
really
all did that
rooms,
lockdown yoga, and it's still some of us are still doing
exactly.
it. Any further questions here? One more. Yes, please.
Thank you. Hi. I have a quick question. Do you think there's been a resurgence in purchasing coastal properties and sort of renovating seaside towns as well as the country?
Lindsay, perhaps you'd like to...
Well, I mean, that trend has already started. If you look at some of the sort of coastal towns, particularly the sort of Kent corner where you've got that sort of rush of the strong artists' corners there. So that, and actually I had 2 inquiries over the weekend with that very area, with those very areas
Whitstable,
in mind.
Margate, Ramsgate, that little corner.
Actually, surprisingly good value still down there. Because frankly, outside of the sort of strip of artistic area, some of these seaside towns are still pretty grotty, of course. But that level of investment will start to drive a change. I mean, Hastings, which I went to 18 months ago before the pandemic, there are some wonderful little corners amongst some pretty grotty bits of Hastings. But that change is upon us. So yes, I'm absolutely certain our coastal towns will be reclaimed.
Have we got time for one more? No, that's it. Well, thank you so much for coming. Thank you again to our panel. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And enjoy the rest of the show today.